Good day. I am Jade Calingasan together with my group mates, Tristan Callos, Heinz Legaspi, and Barie Suayan. So for today, we will discuss the chapter 14, which is the auditing contracts and the purchasing function. Yes, again, I am Jade Calingasan, and I will discuss the first few parts of chapter 14. In this chapter, we look at the purchasing function through an examination of the relative control objectives and the related risk and control issues. And before we proceed to the discussion, let's have first the definition of terms. Contracts. Contracts are written agreements that are enforceable by law, and they provide a mechanism to document the roles, responsibilities, and agreements made between two or more parties. Contracts are also great safeguard to protect all involved against misunderstandings. And next is purchasing. Purchasing is a key function that consists of obtaining the goods and services needed to accomplish the goals of the organization. Purchasing activities can take many forms, ranging from the comparatively straightforward acquisition of the consumable items required for everyday business and through sourcing supplies required to keep a production process running smoothly, to sophisticated procurement contracting processes, perhaps involving the selection of appropriate suppliers and tendering procedures. Next is the control objective. It is an assessment object that defines the risk categories for a process or sub-process. So ano nga ba yung risk? Yung risk naman is an effect of uncertainty of an objective with the effect having a positive or negative deviation from what is expected. And next is the control. Control is a set of measures or actions taken to manage risk and increase the likelihood that established objectives will be achieved. So we will encounter these terms again and again in the latter part of the discussion. And now, without further ado, let us proceed to the next slide. The control objectives and risk and control issues. For each area, we shall examine the component functions and highlight the relative control objectives and the risk and control issues arising from various constituent activities. Control objectives for purchasing. Sa book kasi, kung babasahin nyo, merong napakaraming mga control objectives and risk and control issues. So we decided to select only 4 or 5 items which we think is important to understand the topic. And first control objective for purchasing is to ensure that all purchasing activities are supported by authorized and documented policies and procedures. Next is to ensure that purchasing appropriately supports the business objectives of the organization. Next is to ensure that the appropriate goods, services are obtained at the optimum price at a relevant time. To ensure that suppliers are reliable, financially stable, and able to satisfy the organization's purchasing demands. And lastly, to ensure that all purchasing activity is correctly reflected in the organization's stock control, records, and accounts. To summarize, sa control objectives for purchasing is parang mga guidelines na dapat isaalang-alang or isatisfy ng company para masabing effective and efficient yung purchasing activities sa nasabing company. Dapat daw ay supported by authorized and documented policies and procedures, and it should support the business objectives of the organization. Baka naman kasi basta lang bili ng bili yung company, hindi naman pala yun objective of the business. May nabanggit din dito na optimum price, which is yung optimum kasi ang ibig sabihin niya is most favorable. Favorable ba sa isang company na bumili ng maramihan or paunti-unti lang? Mga ganong bagay yung mga dati sa alang-alang. And To ensure that suppliers are reliable, financially and stable, and able to satisfy the organization purchasing demands. Um, Bakit ba kailangan maging reliable and financially stable ng supplier? Tayo naman mismo yung nagpo-produce ng product, di ba? Ang concern lang kasi natin dito is ang concern kasi natin sa part na ito is bilang isang company na gustong magpatuloy o lumago yung business sa mga susunod pang panahon or yung going concern principle, dapat stable din yung mga supply. Kaya mahalaga rin na yung mapipili nating supplier ay reliable, financially stable, and able to satisfy the organization's purchasing demand. And lastly, dapat daw properly reflected or recorded yung mga purchasing activity sa mga records or accounts. And next slide. The next thing that we shall examine is the relative risk and control issues for purchasing, which is divided into key issues and detailed issues from the purchasing activities. The key issues here are: how does management verify that all purchase orders are justified, authorized, within budget, and accounted for within the correct accounting period? How does management ensure that goods and services are always obtained at the most economical and fair price? How does management verify that all suppliers are stable, reliable, and capable of meeting the organization's need at the optimum price? And how does management verify that all purchases are correctly reflected in stock control and accounting records? Next is yung mga detailed issues ng risk and control issues for purchasing. First is yung what measures ensure that purchase orders are issued only from authorized sources. Are purchase orders confirmed to be within the agreed budgets at the point of commitment? And how is an unauthorized commitment prevented? What mechanisms ensure that appropriate quantities of goods are ordered to support the operational requirements of the business? How does potential suppliers selected, and what prevents the use of unstable, poor quality suppliers? How does management confirm that all goods ordered and invoiced have in fact been received on time? Next naman natin is yung contracting. For many organizations in both the private and public sector, contracting activities can represent a significant degree of risk. In this section, we will define a comprehensive universe of functions and activities associated with contracting, and from that broad universe, make a selection of the more generally applicable processes for further detailed examination of the related issues. So I will discuss the suggested audit universe structure, which is divided into 3 distinct areas. But take note that not all the activities listed will apply in every organization. Let's define first what is contract management. Contract management is the process of managing contract creation, execution, and analysis to maximize operational and financial performance at an organization, all while reducing the financial risk. The first is the contract management environment and pre-contract processes. Yung mga subtopics niya nga is yung contract management environment. Yung examples niya is yung procedures and methods, project management framework, project assessment and approval, engaging, monitoring, and paying consultants, design, assessing the viability and competence of contractors, maintaining an approved list of contractors, tendering procedures, contract and tendering documentation, insurance and bonding, and lastly is yung selection and letting of contracts. So dito sa first part, dito makikita kung yung mga pre-contract processes kung bago mangyari yung mga kontrata. And yung next naman is yung during the currency of the contract. Management information and reporting, performance monitoring, arrangement for subcontractors and suppliers, materials, plant, project assets, valuing work for interim payments, controlling price fluctuations, monitoring and controlling variations, extensions of time, controlling contractual claims, and liquidation and bankruptcies. So yung last naman is yung upon and after contract completion. Contractor's final account, recovery of damages, review of project outturn and performance, and maintenance obligations. So ito yung mga tatlong distinct areas ng suggested audit universe. So next naman is yung contract management environment. In situations where the level of contracting activity justifies the establishment of an overall contract management environment, there is a broad range of component issues to take account of. Consider the level of contracting prevailing within your own organization in the context of potential risk, or yung what is at stake. The control objectives for contract management environment. First is to ensure that contracting activities support the cost-effective achievement of agreed business objectives. The cost-effective methods or processes bring the greatest possible advantage or profit when the amount that is spent is considered. So dito daw dapat ma-maximize yung cost na nagastos ng company at makapag-provide ng greatest possible profit from the contracting activities. Next is to ensure that contract requirements are correctly identified, appraised, justified, and documented. Dapat daw na-identify natin ng maayos, na-budgetan ng maayos, may reasonable and right basis, and dapat properly recorded ang mga contract. Third is to ensure that there is a fair and equitable basis for selecting contractors, meaning no bias or conflict of interest na nangyayari sa pagpili ng mga contractors. To ensure that all payments against the contract are valid, authorized, and correctly accounted for. To ensure that the most appropriate form of contract is utilized and that the organization is adequately protected in the event of contractor default. So bakit ba need na properly form yung mga contract? It is because a well-drafted written contract provides a certainty, clarity, and protects parties' interest if problem arise down the line. The specifics of what the contract covers can be identified, and each party's obligations and rights expressly stated. So in case na there is a contractor's default, may laban and may habol ka sa batas. So next is to ensure that delays and extensions of time are reported, minimized, and authorized where necessary. Meaning, kung hindi man nasunod yung time na nakasaad sa contract, dapat properly reported and authorized. Next naman, yung mga risk and control issues for contract management and environment. Dito muna tayo sa key issues. How does management ensure that significant contract activity is in accord with and supports the achievement of the business objectives of the organization? How is management assured that a realistic and accurate contract cost estimates are generated and subject to adequate ongoing monitoring throughout the contract. What measures ensure that contracts are completed on time, within budget, and to the required standards? Does management take steps to prevent or minimize the effects of potential contractor default? And next naman yung mga detailed issues. What specific measures would prevent any contractual activities which do not comply with strategic direction of the organization? How how are the management and staff made aware of their responsibilities with regard to contracting activities? And has a suitable and workable procedural framework been provided for their guidance? What measures ensure that only suitably justified and authorized contracts are progressed? And what specifically prevents the establishment of unauthorized contract relationships? What measures what what measures ensure that all contract payments are accurately reflected in the project and main accounting systems? Are actual costs adequately monitored against authorized budgets, and would variances promptly be identified for follow-up? And next naman, yung next topic is assessing the viability and competence of contractors, which will be discussed by Barie Suayan.
A pleasant day, everyone. I am the second presenter, Barie Suayan, and today I am going to continue the discussion in Chapter 14, Auditing Contracts and the Purchasing Functions. Our first topic is assessing the viability and competence of contractors. First, let me discuss the meaning of assessing the viability and competence of contractors. When we say assessing the viability, it is the flexible and yet powerful methodology that has been developed to help solve this problem based on ecological principles. However, contractor means anyone brought in by a client to work at the client's premise who is not an employee to the client. The client need to satisfy themselves that contractors are competent. For example, they have sufficient skills and knowledge to do the job safely and without risk to health and safety. The degree of competence required will depend on the work to be done and make sure contractors know and understand what performance you expect. Irrespective of the scale of contracting activity, there is generally universal justification for ensuring that the potential contractor is at least capable. The necessary part when finding the contractor is knowing that they are capable, skilled, and financially stable and operates to recognized standards. For that reason, that contracted activity or project is critical to the ongoing survival and of operation of employing organization. It becomes essential that a detailed assessment of contractors is conducted. Next is control objectives for assessing the viability and competence of contractors. A. To ensure that the stable, financially secure, and appropriately qualified contractors are engaged. Like what I have said earlier, the one of the objectives of contractor must ensure that only stable, financially secure, and appropriately qualified contractors are engaged. Second, to ensure that contractors have sufficient and appropriately skilled resource in order to meet the contract obligations. Katulad lang ulit nung sinabi ko kanina sa paghahanap ng isang contractor ay dapat ay iyong may kakayahan at kaalaman sa ginagawa para mas mapadali yung trabaho and in order to meet the contract obligations. C. To ensure that contractors are selected fairly and without bias or favor. As a professional, it is important to have objectivity in every decision we make and to treat everyone fairly and without bias, since it will show our integrity in every decision we make. D, to ensure that adequate security is available in case of contract breach. E, to ensure that the contract has appropriate and adequate insurance cover and that this is maintained throughout the contract. In this objective, mahalaga malaman kung anong insurance ang isang contractor ang meron ng isang contractor dahil sa trabaho nila ay hindi masasabi ang aksidente. Mas okay na yung prepared ang insurance and maintained throughout the contracts. F, last is to ensure that the contractors with a propensity of contractual claims are identified and avoided. Propensity means that a natural tendency to behave in a certain way. We all have propensities, things we tend to do. Contractors must know how to behave appropriately and know that all actions have consequences. Now, risk and control issues for assessing the viability and competence of contractors. First is the key issues. What general measures are in place to evaluate the quality of contractors bidding for work? First is to be aware that the quality of contractors bidding for work. By this, the client must first evaluate the quality of the contractors in terms of their work and how they perform in a workplace. Number two, what specific measures does management apply to confirm the financial stability of contractors? In here, the management must check the validity of the contractors and what are the evidences of these measures. Third is, how does management ensure the reliability and reputation of potential contractors? Katulad lang nung nasa taas, the management must check and ensure the reliability and reputation para alam nila kung ano ba talaga yung mapagkakatiwalaan or mapagkakatiwalaan ba ang mga contractors at maayos kapag kinuha ang mga ito. Fourth, how does management ensure that the contractor has in place sufficient and appropriate forms of insurance cover? In here, the management must know if every contractor has an insurance and if it is sufficient and appropriate since accidents cannot be predicted. It is important to have insurance. Last, what specific measures would prevent the engagement of a contractor with a reputation or propensity for making contractual claims? Dito naman, dapat ang mga contractor ay may isang salita or walang contract of breach na magaganap. So they must know what are the specific measures that would prevent the engagement of the contract of breach and to examine if the contractor has a reputation for making the contractual claims. In here, it is the detailed issues that we are going to discuss. First, are accurate and up-to-date records of contractors maintained as the basis for evaluating their sustainability. Since the records are not lying, having an accurate and up-to-date records would show how the sustainability of the contractors. How does management ensure that engaged contractors remain financially stable for the duration of the contract? It is necessary to be always engaged in the financial statement of the contractors by budgeting the allotted money for the specific job. Third, what measures ensures that the contractor's insurance remain valid and effective throughout the duration of the contract period? The management must provide the contract when working in the contractors to provide their safety, and having an insurance must remain valid and effective throughout the duration of the contract period. Fourth, Is the contractor's current and projected workload taken into account when assessing their ability to meet the contract demands? If the contractor has been previously engaged by the organization, how does management take account of the contractor's previous performance? In this, the management always check the background of the contractors and how they worked previously for the company. If the records were clear, there is a high possibility that the management would choose that contractors again. These key issues and detailed issues questions show the risk and control issues for assessing the viability and competence of the contractors. By answering these questions would be easier for the management to access and know what should be their next step when finding a contractor. Our next topic is maintaining an approved list of contractors. Selecting contractor is one of the most difficult aspects of project management. It is why most large organizations have an entire department developed to project procurement. To maintain an approved list of contractors must and obtained first list cost, qualifications only, quality and cost based, quality based, sole source, and fixed budget. In the previous section, we discussed the general issues which should be taken into account when an organization is considering the engagement of an external contractor. However, where an organization, such as local authority, is regularly involved, seeking a contractor for familiar projects, it may prove necessary for them to maintain an approved list of reliable, trustworthy, and stable contractors as the basis for selection, perhaps using tendering. This section examines the objective and issues surrounding the maintenance of approved list and includes such related matters as selected criteria, maintaining the accuracy of the data, and compliance with regulations. The control objectives for maintaining an approved list of contractors. A. To facilitate the selection of financially stable, competent, and reliable contractors. Ito ay yung pagkakaroon ng smooth o madaling pagpili sa mga financial stable, may kakayahan at mapagkakatiwalaan ng contractors. B. To ensure that contractors can achieve the required quality and technical standards. Kasi kapag hindi na-achieve ang isang required quality and technical standards, ay hindi maganda ang kalalabasan at ang project ay walang foundation. Kaya dapat ang management ay ini-ensure ang kakayahan ng isang contractor. C. To ensure the selection of contractors with sufficient and appropriate resources. Then D. To ensure that selection of contractors is based on fair and realistic criteria. As what like I have said earlier, that the management should have projectivity and not basing on biasing, since it could result to conflict of interest or corruption. E. To ensure that the relevant data is accurate, complete, and maintained up to date. Like what I have discussed earlier, that the data must accurate and always up to date in order to have a clear and maintained data and sources. F. To ensure that the data is protected from unauthorized access, amendment, or leakage. It is important to have a knowledge when it comes to technology and could adapt to the changes that is happening every day. And last, to ensure that all regulatory and statutory requirements are addressed. Risk and control issues for maintaining approved list of contractors. First, how does management ensure the only financially stable, reliable, and technically competent contractors are selected? Dito ay kung paano nga ba dapat i-handle or i-ensure ang pagpili ng mga contractors kung financially stable, reliable, and technically competent. How does management consistently assess contractors for the following attributes: financial status, technical competence, previous performance resources? How does management ensure that the listing and selection criteria are fair and realistic? Dito, para ma-measure yung mga listing and selection criteria are fair and realistic, ay nakabase dun sa apat na nabanggit ko kanina. Ang financial status, technical competence, previous performance, and resources. Dahil kung walang consistency assessments sa mga contractors ay mahirap ma-achieve ang clear and fair selection. Having established an approved contractor list, what specific measures prevent the engagement of unlisted contractors? Malalaman kung unlisted contractor kung wala sa approved contractor list at walang feedback from the previous company. What measures are in place to ensure that the only valid contractors are entered onto the approved list? And how does management ensure that all the prevailing regulatory and statutory requirements are correctly addressed? These two questions and key issues are related because to ensure all the prevailing regulatory and statutory requirements must first ensure the only valid and authorized amendments para may apply sa approved list. It is essential to know what are your rights and what must be included into the requirements. The following questions are the detailed issues. First, how management developed and documented formal procedures for maintaining an approved list, and have this been authorized for use? In a more detailed issues, the management must have a copy and documented formal procedures. What specific measures prevent the inclusion of an unauthorized entry on the list? The objective here is to have the measures that prevent the inclusion of an unauthorized entry on the list. On the third one, are contractors subjected to progressive evaluation in order to ensure that the listed data is relevant and accurate? The management need to know what are the measures to prevent an unauthorized entry on the list. Would the engagement of an unlisted contractor be subjected to specific authorized, and how would be this evidenced? How is the listing data protected from unauthorized access or amendment? And how does management ensure that all amendments are authorized and accurately? Next, what steps does management take to prove the accuracy and objective of listing data? On that 2.5, the objective shows the importance of having a listed contracts because the management must know all the amendments to be able to data listing from unauthorized access. These questions are for maintaining an approved list of contractors of reliable, trustworthy, and stable contractors as the basis or basics for selection. Our next topic is the tendering procedures. Tendering is the process by which an organization who is in need of goods or services invites other parties to submit a proposal or bid to provide these goods or services. The process of choosing the best or cheapest company to supply goods or do a job by asking several companies to make offers for supplying the goods or doing the work. where, where an organization such as a local authority has an obligation to demonstrate both fairness and value for money when selecting contractors, it may choose to put contracts to bid out tenders. The principal aims is to ensure that the optimum contractors is selected for the job, having regard for economic quality, stability, and technical issues along the way. Tendering is not appropriate in every case, mainly because it can costly for employer and contractors alike. Control objectives for tendering procedures. To ensure that tendering is the most appropriate and cost-effective form of contractors selection in the circumstances. Like what I have said earlier, that tendering means offer or to present something. In the tendering procedure ay yung pinakaangkop at cost-effective form of contractor selection in the circumstances. To add up, it is essential to have a cost-effective form in a way that makes the contract easier to distinguish the selection in the circumstances. B. To ensure that the best value for money is obtained when selected. Wait, let me adjust. It's selected when contractors. This objective is to obtain the value for money by selecting contractors, applying the only list and authorized contractors in order to give value for the allotted budget or money for the certain project. C. To ensure the most suitable and appropriate form of tendering is applied and justified. Upang matiyak ang pinakaangkop and appropriate na paraan ng tendering ay inilalapat at nabigyang katwiran. By this, it shows clear intention to the other party and they acknowledge the contractors and giving them unbiased and rights. To ensure the matters of contractor reliability, sustainability, and technical competence are adequately addressed. These objectives explain that the truthfulness, firmness, and technical competence are addressed properly. This matter is a must in a part of the contractors and the management. E. To ensure that authorized and documented tendering procedures are in place. F. Ensure that the tendering process incorporates adequate competitions. In this is just to put tendering process to incorporate adequate competition in a way that it shows fair and healthy competition into other management. Give value for the money when selecting contractors that could choose to put contract to bids out tender. G. To ensure that the tendering process is fair and free from personal bias or undue influence. Like what I have said earlier, tendering process is fair and not biased. In this chapter, objectivity is the most important since it is not influenced by persons' feeling or opinions in considering and representing facts. H. To ensure that the tendering instructions are accurate, complete, and ambiguous. It is important to give clear and vivid instruction to be able to know what are really the intentions. Having an accurate, complete, and ambiguous instruction will provide a good tendering procedure. I. To ensure that the tendering documentation is accurate and complete. To add up, having a tendering documentation must be accurate and complete. J. To ensure that the adequate and workable tendering timetable is applied and adhered to. The next objective is making sure that the tendering timetable is applied and adhered in a way it is adequate and workable. To ensure that the tendering process is fairly conducted and that fraud and collusion are prevented. Moving forward, integrity is a must. Being honest and having strong moral principles, it is important as it will show fairly and clear intention and it would prevent fraud and collusion. To ensure that the tendering process is relative to the type of contract and conform to any legislative or regulatory requirements. This objective is connected to the contract and conform to any legislative or regulatory requirements in a way that following the rules and bylaws would help the management and tendering process. To ensure the appropriate internal procedures are in place to protect the recording, handling, and storage assessments of submitted tenders. Having an internal procedures would protect the recording, handling, storage, and assessment of submitted tenders, wherein internal controls are the mechanism, rules, and procedures implemented by the company to ensure that integrity of the financial and accounting information, promote accountability, and prevent fraud. Having this would put procedures in place. And to ensure that submitted tenders are adequately protected from unauthorized access, opening, amendment, or leakage. Tendering submissions means all or any document submitted by the tenderer in response to and in accordance with the requirements of the relevant invitation to tender and the applicable procurement documentations and include without limitation, excluded confidentiality undertaking, responses to clarification and other information materials and documentation submitted to the tenderer. In this objective, it means that the management should adequately protected the submitted tenders from unauthorized access, opening, amendment, or leakage. In this objective must continue to treat the contractors equally and fairly. The contracts must always review and double check as it would show the tenders are impartially and appropriately reviewed as the basis for selection. To ensure the errors, qualifications, and omissions are detected with objectively dealt with. One of the essential objectives is to detect the errors, qualifications, and omission and dealt it objectively. Last but not the least, to most conducive to a favorable outcome should be tender for it to authorize for the selection. Risk and control issues for tendering procedures. Key issues. First, how does the management know that tendering is justified as the most appropriate method of awarding contracts? By knowing this, the management would know how to explain as the most essential method for awarding the contracts. Second, has management established comprehensive, documented, and authorized tendering procedures and how this compliance with this assured? It is important to know their obligation as it would promote fairness and value for money and also to show integrity and objectivity. Third, how does management ensure that the tendering procedures incorporates adequate and appropriate competition? By this, ang management ay nagsasama-sama ng sapat at na competition to ensure tendering procedures. Fourth, how does management ensure that the tendering documentation accurately incorporates all the required information and correctly complies with the chosen form of contract? This key issue is important as it answers the need of the management, and how they are sure to their contractors. As said to the question, how does management having the answer to this question would help the management and also the contractors. How are tenders protected from unauthorized opening, access, amendment, or leakage? It may sound simple, but they must protect it from unauthorized opening, access, amendment, or leakage, but it is not that simple when performed, since without knowledge about the technology or so, the management would not be able to protect it from an unauthorized invader. And for the detailed issues, first, does management take appropriate account of the cost of tendering when choosing the optimum method of awarding contracts? How is the authorized for applying a tendering approach evidenced? Are the costs associated the tendering process accurately assessed, justified, and monitored throughout? How does management ensure that all submitted tenders are recorded or acknowledged on receipt and remain secure from tampering without awaiting review? Does the review committee document its recommendations and deliberations? To summarize the detailed issues in tendering procedures is all about giving emphasis to the account of cost of tendering, authorization for applying tendering approach, monitoring, assessing the tendering process, to the submitted tenders and to review committee document, as it would result to the goal of the tendering procedures, which is to demonstrate fairness and value for money when selecting contractors. Again, tendering procedures primarily goal is to pick the best contractor for the task while keeping the economic, quality, stability, and technical challenges in mind. And that is for my report. Thank you for listening. Once again, I am Barie Suayan, reporter from Group 2. And to continue our presentation, let me introduce our next presenter, Callos.
So, hello and have a blessed day. I'm King Tristan Callos. I'm here to discuss the continuation of the chapter 14, which is the contracting and tendering documentation, selection and letting of contracts and performance in monitoring. Na continuation nga ng chapter 14 yung third part. Then, so let's discuss first is the contracting and tendering documentation. Dito, in-ensure natin na dapat accurate and legal yung contract na iano natin, parang i-document natin or yung ibibigay natin sa isang person or sa isang party. And it has dapat secured talaga dapat yung secured na walang magli-leak or anuman na mangyari dun sa document na gagawin. So next is yung control objectives ng ng topic so letter E is to ensure that all stages of contract administration are supported by accurate, complete, and legible documentation. So ayun nga, kailangan accurate tsaka legal dapat yung document na gagawin or ibibigay. Then next is to prevent, minimize or description, delay, and additional cost by documentation errors and omissions. Yun nga, para para mabuhasin yung mga errors sa document. Kaya kaya meron tayo nung contract and tendering documentation. Then letter C, to ensure that all contract documentation is prepared in accordance with the relevant form of contract and regulations. Letter D, to ensure that all documentation is surely stored, adequately protected from loss, damage, unauthorized amendment or leakage. E, to ensure that the location of all documentation can be promptly traced. F, to ensure that only authorized and valid amendments are correctly applied to contract documents. G, to ensure that only current versions of documentation are utilized. H, to ensure that all supporting information are correctly incorporated into the required standard. I, to ensure that bonds, securities, completion, certificates, correspondence, etc., etc., are accounted for and securely filed. J, to prevent the premature or accidental disposal of contract documentation. So, last two is to ensure that the status of all contracts can be determined promptly and supported by the relevant documents. And last, letter L, to ensure that all relevant documents are retained and remain available for the required period. So, yun yung pinaka-objective or yung pinaka-summarize or pinaka-ano nung objective ng contract objective ng topic na which is the contracted tendering documentation ay maayos na nakatago dapat or nakatago yung documents na hindi mawawala, madali i-trace. Yung nakatago siya pero madali siyang i-trace ng authorized person. Then, dapat secured din siya. Then, dapat hindi magle-leak yung information na nasa loob ng document. And also dapat accurate yung pinaka-information ng document na nakalagay doon or yung ginawa. So, next is yung key issues which is kasi ang dami nung key issues doon. So, pumili na lang ako ng limang issue na lang. 5 issue doon na sa tingin ko yung pinaka-importante o pinaka-inaano. Pero halos lahat naman yung importante. So, ito lang yung pinili ko na yan. Kasi yan. How does the management ensure that all the required contract documentation is generated at appropriate time? What specific action does management take to avoid and detect errors and omissions? So what steps are in place to ensure that all relevant contract documentation is produced in the appropriate form and to be required standard? Yung dito kasi, yung sa third part, yung kaya naging issue siya kasi merong sinusunod na standard sa paggawa ng documentation. Then, madalas hindi na nasusunod kasi sa dami ng ginagawa or sabihin na natin hindi pag ganong kagaling yung gumawa ng documentation. So, or minsan hindi na nasusunod yung standard or yung required na or yung appropriate na form ng document. So, what measures does management take to ensure that contract documents are securely stored and protected from loss and damage and unauthorized access? Hindi to kasi naging issue na rin. Ito yung naging issue kasi minsan parang yung iba kasi sa atin parang basta na mailagay kung saan man yung may ilalagay man yung isang bagay. Parang basta na mailagay dito tapos parang hindi mo sure parang paano ba? yung basta na makalagay, kahit importante yung document na yun, basta na makalagay, or nilagay mo pero nalimutan mo kung saan mo nilagay, or kung saan mo tinago yung document na yun. So, parang yun yung naging main issue, na nalilimutan mo kung saan mo tinago, then, or basta mo nang tinago, pero tapos hindi mo na matandaan kung saan mo nilagay yung mga documents, kaya nagiging issue. So next is detailed issue. How does management accurately identify all the documentation requirements? Where errors are noted, what steps are taken to ensure that all the affected documents are recalled and accurate replacements to replacement distribute to all affected parties. Would the loss or impairment of contract should be capable of prompt detection? Then last, how does management ensure that all copy sets are complete and legible throughout? The next yung next topic is selection and letting of contracts. Dito, selection contracts represent the balancing of risks between the parties, and these are expressed in the form of documented rights and obligations. Selecting the most appropriate form of contract is often crucial in ensuring the fair balance of risks and rights. And these section examples are the related issues. Additionally, it is necessary to ensure that the chosen contract is correctly enacted. So, yun sa topic na to, dapat yung selection and letting of contracts, siya yung parang binabalance niya lahat ng i-risk sa lab ng company sa mga auditor, ganun. Then, select niya, which is yung pinaka-appropriate doon, yung bibigyan yung pinaka-appropriate na so the next topic is the selection and letting of contracts. Contracts represents the balancing of risk between the parties, and these are expressed in the form of documented rights and obligations. Selecting the most appropriate form of contract is often crucial in ensuring a fair balance of risks and rights. In this section, examples the related issues. Additionally, it is necessary to ensure that the chosen contract is correctly enacted. So, dito, yung contract is siya yung mismong nagbabalance ng risk between two parties para ma-ensure na magagawa yung risk o makokontrol yung risk na meron sa company. Then, si selection and letting of contracts, siya yung pupili ng pinaka-applicable na contract doon sa party. And yung letting is yung yung process of receiving bids prior to any award of construction contract for any portion of the project based on the lawinsider.com na yun yung explain ng let or letting. So, pero dito pero kung hahanap ka ng pinaka most appropriate na contract, is siya pa yung pinaka crucial kasi parang ano ba to? Pinaka-applicable, yung form ng contract, which is parang hindi naman both parties alam yung form na yun, like basta hindi nila alam, parang ganun. Then next is yung objectives of selection and letting of contracts. To ensure that the most appropriate form of contract is utilized and that risks are fairly balanced between parties. B. To ensure that the optimum contract pricing method is selected for the circumstances. To ensure that the organization is adequately protected in the event of contractor breach. D. To ensure that the contract condition offer suitable remedies. E. To ensure that the accurate and contract completion of all contracts and documentation. Then yung M, then next is letter F is to settle disputes within the contract condition by mutual agreement. So, ayun nga. Dapat sa contract may agreement muna yung dalawang party para maano yung contract. Parang, ano ba tawag to? Basta parang gumana yung contract or basta gumana yung contract between or yung contract sa dalawa para. Then, H is to ensure that all key requirements, timings, and obligations are defined in the contract. Dapat dito, ini-ensure niya ni selection letting of contract na naka-include lahat ng important information, lahat ng rights, lahat ng obligations. Dapat nandun na mismo sa contract na ginawa para do sa parties. Then I, to ensure that all contractual relationships are authorized. J, to ensure that the contract are correctly and legally enacted. K, to ensure that all applicable European and international legal applications are correctly addressed. And lastly, letter L is to ensure that all contract documentation is securely stored, adequately protected from loss, theft, or leakage, or damage. Basta, nakatago yung contract ng two parties na secured dapat at impossible na basta secured siya sure na walang mangyayaring masama doon sa contract, hindi mo punit, hindi mo kakaroon damage, hindi mo mawawala. Kung pwede ilagay sa safe, pwede sa safe. So, yan. Then, key issues is how does management ensure that the most suitable and appropriate form of contract is selected for the circumstances. Kasi, yung sa una, hindi naman parang naging problema siya gawa ng halos ng management hindi ina-analyze o ina-assess muna yung contract na pinaka-applicable dun sa o pinaka-appropriate dun sa circumstances na ng two parties or hindi nila considerate yung circumstances na meron yung isang party. Then, next is what steps does management take to ensure that contracts provide adequate protection for the organization in the event of contractor breach. Next is what general measures are applied to ensure that only reliable, stable, and suitable qualified contractors are engaged. Then next is when applicable, how does management ensure that all possible European and international legal applications are addressed. Then next is what measures are in place to protect contract documentation from loss, damage, or theft. Kasi doon sa last bullet, kasi parang merong mga nangyari na parang hindi safe. Basta nang nakatago na hindi mo na sure kung safe ba talaga or safe ba talaga dun yung kung ano yung measures. parang ano yung pinaka-basis nila, parang hindi mo nila titingnan kung ano, or inaalong yung kung ano yung, or ano yung pinaka-basis nila na kung ano yung, kung safe ba talaga dito, or kung safe ba talaga do sa, yung contract na safe yung contract sa pinaglalagyan nito, parang, yun. Then, detailed issues in how does management prevent the disruption and possible additional costs associated with utilizing an appropriate form of contract. Then, how does management assesses the contractual requirements for a given project or scenario? Then, next is what steps are in place to ensure that documentation errors are effectively and properly detected prior to the relevant contract being enacted. Then, last, for necessary, how does management ensure that contract negotiations are proficiently and adequately conducted? So, ayun lang yung sa detailed issues na meron sa, ito yung pwedeng maging possible questions sa, para malaman kung, hindi naman para malaman, yung kung ano yung mga issues na meron sa selecting and letting of contracts. Then, last topic na i-discuss ko is performance monitoring. Sa performance monitoring, all contracts are created for a purpose, and they will only exist where individual organizations has identified and justified a particular need, perhaps expressed through a number of objectives, criteria, or targets. To achieve the identified objectives, the project and contract must be monitored for progress according to plan. In this section, we take account of the issues for the task establishment of and operation of a performance monitoring environment. Yung sa performance monitoring is yung parang to improve the employee productivity and to lead an increase in overall productivity of the company. Then yung nag-exist lang parang dito yung parang yung contracts is nag-exist lang siya pagka nag-exist lang siya if merong parang target or sa performance parang nag-exist lang siya if yung company or yung isang tao is meron siyang target na particular goal, objectives, or criteria. Or need niya ng criteria para ma-monitor if perform ba ng ayos yung nasa loob ng company or yung member ng organizations. Then, ito yung mga control objectives for performance monitoring. Then, ito yung key issues which is pumili lang ulit ako ng 5 na limang key issues sa under ng performance monitoring. The first is how is management made aware of contract progress and achievement of key stages and underlying objectives. Then, next is what measures alert management if the contract or project is not going to be completed on time or within budget. Kasi yun nga, nagiging issue kasi siya nagiging issue yung budget or kasi parang minsan kulang o yung na-forecast nilang time o yung estimated time na hindi nasusunod, napapa-advance or napapa-late, or minsan yung budget kinukulang tapos hindi pa tapos yung ginagawa. For example is building, parang kulang na yung budget mo pero kulang na budget mo para hindi pa tapos yung pinapagawa mo. Which is nagle-lead nga dun sa second bullet na nagiging issue. So, yun nga, parang parang mali yung naging estimation nila. Then, 3. Would management be advised promptly of problems or delays, and how is this evidence? So, next is, how does management monitor the quality technical workmanship standards are being achieved? Then last is, where weakness, problems, shortcomings are apparent, how does management ensure that such data is complete and that appropriate corrective action has been taken in each case? So, yun lang yung sa key issues. Next is yung detailed issues. Detailed issues has action has been taken, identify. Yung sa detailed issues, critical stages of contract so that progress can be subsequently monitored. Second is, have realistic budgets been established for the contract. Would management be alerted or shortfalls on anticipated quality or workmanship standards? Then what specific measures are in place to ensure that all reported problems, delays, etc. are issues usually followed up, effectively addressed? Where performance shortfalls have contractual implications, how does management ensure that appropriate contract remedy is applied and concluded? Then last is, are performance shortcomings and related administrative problems noted as the basis for subsequently revising and improving the quality of the contract management environment? Yung sa detailed issues, parang magkakatulad lang siya pero meron din pagkakaiba. Ang pagkakatulad nila is yung parang parang yung sa budget nung or estimated budget ng company kung matatapos ba agad yung project or yung nung ginagawa ng company. Then, kung ma-address ba ng ayos ni management yung problema or yung mga shortcomings na mangyayari dun sa project na ginagawa ng company. So that's the end of my reporting or discussion today. So thank you for listening and have a blessed day. Thank you.
Good day, I am Heinz Legaspi, the last presenter of our group. I will be discussing the last part of Chapter 14, Auditing Contracts and Purchasing Functions. So we will go through 3 different parts: valuing of work for interim payment, contractor's final account, and the last is review of project alternate performance. So let us start with the first part. Valuing work for interim payments. So where a contract is set to run over a prolonged period, such as for building or civil engineering project, the contract terms may specify the circumstances for interim or staged payments. So before making an interim payment, lalo na kung yung gagawa ng contract is prolonged period business or yung mga businesses na long term, yung mismong contract na binabanggit will specify kung ano yung mga circumstances para sa payment. Let us move on to control objectives for valuing work for interim payments. First one, to ensure that payments are made only for work actually completed and goods and services received. So to make sure that payments will only cover the completed work and goods and services received. Next one, to ensure that payments are made only where goods and services are to required standard and quality. So you will only make payments when the goods or services received are of quality. 'Di ba, sino ba naman yung magbabayad tapos yung matatanggap nilang goods or services is hindi yung in-expect nila or yung hindi expected. Siyempre dun ka na magbabayad sa kung ano yung magandang dulot sa'yo or ano yung sa tingin mong mas maganda. Next one, to ensure that all payments are subject to suitable prior authorization. If you are to pay, siyempre i-su-sure mo or you will make sure na yung babayaran mo is suitable. This is like to guarantee that appropriate prior authorization is required for all payment or payments. The next one is to ensure that payments relate only to contracted activities, to verify that payments only pertain to actions that were agreed upon. Hindi ka pwede magkaroon ng payment sa isang activity na hindi naman kasama or wala naman sa pinag-usapan or hindi stated sa contract. Next one is to ensure that work completed is accurately measured and correctly calculated using the defined method and price. So to verify that the work completed is correctly measured in order to compute the payment accurately. So syempre hindi ka pwedeng magbayad ng kumpleto kung hindi naman tinapos ng tao yung trabaho. So dapat accurate ang payment at ang time para syempre walang malulugi both sides. It is like you will earn what you worked on. Kung ano lang yung trinabaho mo, yun lang yung sakop ng payment na matatanggap or makukuha mo. So the next one is to ensure that work completed or goods received are adequately supported by documentation in accordance with contracted conditions. So this is to verify whether the good or service you received are supported by contract, or if you receive the goods or service, of course, with the terms of the contract. Next one, to ensure that accounts are accurately settled within the timescales stipulated within the contract. This is to verify that payment will be done on time stated in the contract. Hindi pwede ngayon ang usapan nyo or ngayon yung date na nakalagay sa contract, then sasabihin mo na baka next month mabayaran. When things are settled and have it in contract, dapat masettle both parties ang payment na mangyayari. Next one, to ensure that all non-standard charges, for example, for variations, are valid and supported. To ensure the validity of the charges. Siyempre, babayad ka, hindi naman yung mismong usapan nyo lang yung babayaran. So, may extra charges din yun. And siyempre, hindi naman pwedeng magbabayad ka lang. Dapat valid and supported pa rin yung usapan nyo. Last one is to ensure that where applicable, the correct value of retention is calculated and applied to interim account. So this is to verify that the correct value of retention is allocated and determined in the interim account. So next we have the contractor's final account. In here, upon completion of a contracted activity, the contractors will submit their final account. This may be the only account render, or it may be preceded by previous interim accounts. The employer will wish to ensure the accuracy and relevance of the account and to confirm that the effects of prior payments, outstanding claims, and retained values have been accurately accounted for. So, in here, the contractors will deliver their final account following the conclusion of a contracted activity. This account might be the sole one rendered, or it might be followed by earlier interim accounts. The employer will want to validate that the consequences of earlier payments or unresolved claims and withheld assets have been appropriately accounted for, as well as the correctness and relevancy of the account. The next one is the control objectives for contractor's final account. The first one, to ensure that only valid, accurate, and authorized accounts are paid. This is to verify that only accounts or the accounts to be paid are valid, accurate, and authorized. Next one, to ensure that accounts relate only to work actually completed or goods or service provided to the required standard. Like what I've said a while ago, that you will only pay for the work which is completed and of quality. Next one, to ensure that all accounts are costed in accordance with the measurement methods and prices contained in the contract. Payments must be made with the standard method or price computed which are included or stated in the contract. Next one, to ensure that the contractor has met all contract obligations prior to account settlement. This is to confirm the validity and proper incorporation of any outstanding contractual claims values. Next is to ensure that previous interim accounts payments have been correctly taken into account. This is to guarantee that fees for modifications or adjustments are legitimate, permitted, and fairly computed. Next is to ensure that retentions values have been accurately calculated and applied. This is to make sure that liquidated damage values are accurately incorporated. Next is to ensure that price fluctuations have been correctly calculated in accordance with the agreed formula base. This is to guarantee that any tax-related issues are properly handled. Next one, to ensure that the values of any contractual claims are valid and have been accurately incorporated. This is to confirm the deduction of any agreed upon damages owed by the organization. Next, to ensure the charges in respect of variations or modifications are valid, authorized, and correctly calculated. Just like what I have said a while ago, to guarantee that fees for modification or adjustments are legitimate, permitted, and fairly computed. Next, ensure that where applicable, values of liquidated damages are correctly incorporated. This is to make sure that the liquidated damage values are accurately incorporated. Next, to guarantee or to ensure that all taxation matters are correctly addressed. This is to guarantee that any taxes related issues are properly handled. Next one, to ensure that any agreed damages due to the organizations have been deducted. This is to confirm the deduction of any agreed upon damages owed to the organization. Next is to ensure that all the key contract events reflected in the account are adequately supported by the documentation. So, ensuring that the paperwork for all the significant contracts events reported in the account is sufficient. The last one, to ensure that the amount is settled within any agreed period stipulated in the contract. To guarantee that This is to guarantee that the money is paid back within whatever time frame the contract specifies. So next, or the last part, is the review of project outturn and performance. where a project, contracted or otherwise, has run its course, it can be beneficial to conduct a post-completion review of the project, primarily to ensure that all of the objectives established at excuse me at the outset have been or have actually been achieved. It might be advant- advantageous to do a post-completion evaluation of a project after it has finished, whether it was contracted or not. This is mainly to make sure that all the goals set forth at the beginning have actually been accomplished. Next is the control objectives for review of project outturn and performance. So the first one, to ensure that all contract and project objectives were actually achieved. This is to confirm that all contract and projects goals were in fact met. Next, to ensure that all aspects of the contract and the contractor's performance are reviewed against expectations, requirements, and standards. This is to make sure that all contracts or all contract terms and the contractor performance are assessed in comparison to agreed upon standards, criteria, and expectations. The third one, to ensure that the contract management procedures and policies are reviewed so that they can be progressively improved. So this is to make certain that the contract management policies and processes are examined so they can be gradually enhanced. Next one is to ensure that all contract obligations have been satisfactorily met. This is to confirm that every contract requirement has been satisfactorily fulfilled. Next is to ensure that the contract was completed on time and within budget, and to note reasons for failures and shortcomings. This is to make that the contract was finished on schedule and under budget, and to record the causes of setbacks and failures. Next is to ensure that the accounting and management information systems are assessed for their accuracy, efficiency, and reliability. This is to guarantee that the accuracy, efficiency, and dependability of the accounting and management information systems are evaluated. Next is to ensure that all key contract events were effectively and efficiently handled. This is to make sure all significant contracts events were handled skillfully and successfully. Next is to ensure that all key contracts and events were supported by adequate and accurate documentary trails. This is to guarantee that all significant contracts events were adequately and accurately documented. Next is to ensure that all non-standard events, example, variations, and extensions of time were suitably assessed, justified, and authorized. This is to guarantee that all non-standard occurrences were properly evaluated, justified, and approved. Next one is to ensure that all the relevant legal and regulatory issues were satisfactorily addressed and that the most appropriate form of contract was applied in the circumstances. This is to make sure that all performance of the contractors and consultants are assessed or monitored. The last one, to ensure that the organization's resources and staff are reviewed in light of their performance during a contract so that administrative improvements can be made. So this is to make sure that all legal and regulatory issues. I know, I'm sorry. To make sure the effectiveness, to make sure that the organization's work and resources are evaluated in light of how they perform during the contract so that the administrative advances may be achieved. Next one is to ensure that all conclusions and action points are reported, agreed by senior management, and subsequently authorized. This is to guarantee that each and every result and recommendation is communicated and accepted by the senior management and then approved. Next one is to ensure that any outstanding contractual obligations are identified and resolved. This is to guarantee that any unfulfilled contract or contractual commitments are found and fulfilled. And the last one is to ensure that staff training and development needs are identified and addressed. This is for the purpose of identifying and resolving staff training and develop needs. So that will be all for our group presentation. We're hoping that you learned something from us. Thank you for listening. But before I end this presentation, once again, I am Heinz Legaspi, and together with my groupmates, we will leave you this life quote by Albert Einstein. Strive not to be a success, but rather to be of value. Thank you.